Hey everyone, welcome back to Bridge Stories. You are listening to Season 2. If you're new to our podcast, this is our place where we just sit down and give people space and time to tell stories of how they've encountered God and been changed by Him. This season we're going to be sitting down with some familiar faces to many of you, and we hope that you'll get a little deeper glimpse into who they are and the things that God has brought them through. We're also excited to get to introduce you to some new people, some people with some incredible stories to share of how God has provided and encouraged them and helped them to live out a life of faith. We hope that these stories encourage you and challenge you in your faith as you walk closer to Jesus than ever before, as you seek Him with all of your heart. So sit back and enjoy and be encouraged as you listen. With that, let's jump in. Awesome. Episode 10, the grand finale. Welcome, Ben.
I'm very happy to be here.
You just reminded me, like literally 30 seconds ago. If you're listening to this or watching on YouTube, the intro music, and if you watch till the end, the outro music is literally you and the worship team mixed it for us. So we're glad that you're here.
Thank you.
I think the thing I love doing most about the podcast is that people get an idea, maybe a deeper idea of who you are. And then, like when you meet somebody new and you feel like you got to make small talk to like figure out what do we have in common. I feel like it just explodes all that and people can approach you and say like, hey, I have that in common because I heard you on the podcast. So I'm excited about that. But you've seen podcasts. We've chatted a bit, but I was thinking to start, I grew up in a family of 7, 5 kids and mom and dad, and I know how chaotic that was. And that's small compared to the family you grew up in.
Yes.
So tell me about the family you grew up in.
So we were a family of 9, so 7 kids, and I wasn't supposed to be because my dad had this great idea. He's going to get a vasectomy. And then whoever, my strength, my guy, he had my back and he rebuilt the bridge. And thus I am here.
Wow.
I'm meant to be here, I think.
Yeah.
So I'm the caboose. So
what a great way to get it started. Ice broken.
is that okay to say on a podcast?
Of course it is.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I could tell you another time, but there's like 4 or 5 words you can't say on YouTube, but that's not one of them. So the ice is broken.
Vasectomy. We said it.
Okay, so you have 6 brothers and sisters.
Yes.
What were the dynamics like? What were mom and dad like? That's a lot of attention-needy people with very little attention to go around. So,
Well, I'll give you a picture. So back in the day, we were a church-going family. So all I know is Christ in my home. That's what I know. That's what I remember. So Sundays, we're always going to church. One of those big old school station wagons, and 3 in front, because that's when you could sit in the center between mom and dad. 3 in the middle, and then 3 in the back facing the traffic.
oh, I remember that.
So, if you were going to get killed by a semi, you would see it at least, So that's my memory with a picture of our family. But every Sunday, we went to Melodyland Christian Center, and that Sunday was family days, and so that's my memories, and that's what we did.
Wow. As far as just church goes, we can get into kind of the later developments of what that place became and how this place happened. What was your kind of your feeling about church as a young kid? Did you enjoy it? Was it like, well, this is just what we do, and so you just go along with it?
Well, I'll kind of rewind a little bit and answer that question. But so when I was probably, I will say 5-ish, there's a story where my mom said to me that we're driving down the road, and I say to my mom, I need Jesus now. And she's like, honey, sure, of course, we'll just wait till we get home. And I said, no, I need Jesus now. So pulled over to the side of the road, and that's where I committed my heart when I was like 5 years old to Jesus. And then, so back to the church thing, so there's a few stories at Melodyland where, as young as 5 and 6 years old, for some reason, well, obviously God knows these reasons, but there was words spoken over my life that you're going to be a pastor now. At that young age, I don't know what that means. I wanted to be a trash truck driver.
Dude, I got two kids who would take that in a heartbeat.
That's what I wanted to do, but God had other plans. So
Now, many people will know, some people who don't come to church here watch, but almost everyone will know who you are and what you do here. You're the pastor of worship here. So was music part of your home life?
music was not a huge part of our home life.
Interesting.
I can remember one thing my parents made sure that every kid, so all 7 kids, had to take 2 years of piano lessons.
Okay.
It was the worst experience of my life. It was the worst. I was 10, 11 years old, and so for 2 years until I was in 6th grade, I had to take piano lessons, never practiced, hated it. Greatest piano teacher, she was, dynamite, but I just didn't like it. So, and I wasn't natural at it either. And so I did as little as possible just to do the bare minimum.
Yeah.
And then from there, I was done. And then, I didn't think music was in my future.
It's interesting to think that, because the majority of people I know who are very musical, I talk to them and you almost feel like, oh, well, you just started ahead because you had, a mom who was very musical or a dad was. So your family just wasn't like that.
No, what I remember about singing was, we're at church, we're singing old hymns, standing next to my dad, and listening to his part and trying to mimic his part. And, this is my story. Hear my dad sing his part, and I'm mimicking him. And so that's a cool memory that I have of doing that. But my parents sang, and they actually were in choirs when they were in high school. But apart from that, I know that my grandfather could play the piano by ear. My aunt on my dad's side could play the piano by ear. And not so much on my mom's side that I remember. But so music was in there, but it was never something that I desired to do.
And it sounds like maybe I'm just inferring it from what you're saying, but there's a huge difference from parents take kids to church because they think it's a good idea to have some religion in their life, and parents who take kids to church because it's who they are as well. But it sounds to me like your mom and dad had a pretty vibrant relationship with the Lord.
Absolutely. My parents were Lutheran. They grew up Lutheran, and I guess people would say, no offense to Lutherans, but they would just say it's Catholic light. And so my parents growing up Lutheran was pretty dry, and they would say that they weren't really saved, or they weren't saved.
Okay.
That might have been an identity. Okay, we go to church, this is what we do, because that's what the habit is. They had an experience in their mid-20s where they experienced salvation, and radical for them, and filling of the Holy Spirit, and it was at the Lutheran Church.
Oh wow!
And so my mom likes to joke and say it was called Holy Spirit Lutheran, and they said big Lutheran, small Holy Spirit. So they ultimately had to leave that church because they didn't believe the same things that they did. And so what happened with them is, so they were filled by the Spirit. They would go and do, prayer nights at these different gatherings of all these people that were in the Lutheran Church that experienced this radical salvation and filling of the Holy Spirit. And so that's all I've known is my parents modeled, taught to us what it really meant to be a Christ follower, because they've experienced miracles, they've believed for things, and they've seen these things happen. So they've seen the move of God in their lives, and that through is their testimony. And the gift to us is Jesus through all 7 kids believing. Wow. Which is pretty cool.
That's really, really powerful stuff. Sometimes people hear mom pull over the car at 5 years old. By the way, I was thinking that whole time that I hope that didn't terrify your mom. Like, is this like an omen that something terrible is about to happen and Ben needs God?
No, to her it was natural.
Yeah.
Because that's just who she was. And she's like, oh, God's talking to my kid at 5 years old. That's pretty cool, because I spent a lot of time with my mom growing up, we would take a lot of car rides because I had some health challenges at that time. And so we were in the car a lot. And so talking about certain things, and I don't remember, but that's the one story that is significant
How cool.
in our lives.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so often people can hear, I need Jesus at 5 years old, and oh man, the rest of your life must have been pretty easy from there. Um, grew up in church. How crazy could it have been? But paint a picture for us, because I kind of know your personality. I have a feeling there's some mischief mixed in there, as my 5-year-old would say. He likes that word, mischief. What was just kind of growing up in and around church like for you? How did you kind of find your place and figure out where you fit?
Well, it's interesting. Actually, mischief was not me. I'm a rule follower. It probably manifests later in life, which is weird, but that's okay. But I'm a rule follower, and then if you said to be there at a certain time, I'm there early. And that's the time. If you said to do this, wouldn't do this. I would say that I'm probably more introverted and maybe borderline, and so I'm not going to be the first person that's going to go meet somebody. That's just not my personality. And so in and around church, it was my brother. We're close. We're only 13 months apart. He was the one that people probably were drawn more to. You hear a story, he and Danny would get in mischief. Okay, that's so my brother Josh and Danny were, more in that. And me, I would have been the follower. And if they're doing something, okay, I guess I'll do it too.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about, because I know there's a growing group of kind of middle high schoolers who listen to these. What was middle school, high school like for you?
Let's see. I left elementary school, so I went to public elementary school, Panorama.
Oh, cool.
Okay, go Panthers.
You know how many people on this podcast have told us their alma mater, like in another state, and then shouted out their mascot?
Yeah, why not?
It's like embedded deep into what we're supposed to do. Go Miners, Nevada Union High School.
Yeah, but I'll get to my other alma maters later.
Okay.
So from there, my parents, what they wanted to do is give the experience to all of us kids to go to a Christian school. So I went to Christian junior high and then high school, and it switched from Melialand Christian High School to Southern California Christian High School.
Okay.
So in junior high, 13 kids in my class. So imagine that, So, I like girls, and there's like 5 girls to choose from, right? So you're like, I'm not sure. None of them seem cute to me, but, I think in junior high, you just, with a small class, you develop close friendships with those that are around you. And at that time, I was a tall kid. I was, 7th and 8th grade, I got to be 6 foot by the time I was in 8th grade, and all my friends were like 5 foot, so it was kind of weird looking. So if you're listening, there is awkwardness, when you have, big feet, big head, and a tall, slender body. You look kind of weird. Big ears too. So
We got headphones on now, so.
Yeah, you're covered. Thank you. I've covered them.
Yeah. Before we got started, I was telling you, I think I had watched this video of a famous, I guess, organist in Europe who was talking a bit about kind of every scar is the word he was using. Every scar that he carried with him was another validation that God had called him to lead worship, that his experience was every time a major life event, whether terrible or awesome, was another opportunity to get up to lead worship in a way that was kind of more raw and more honest before God. And I feel like a lot of people have that experience. For instance, yesterday, like even just talking, you just got emotional, and it wasn't the fake emotion that maybe you see in televangelism sometimes. I think if you were in the room, you felt like, wow, like what you're talking about matters deeply to you. I want to be part of that. It draws people in. So I think if you want to talk a little bit about maybe finishing high school, but I'd love to hear about some of those moments, especially in kind of adult life. I can imagine what some of those might be, but I'm curious to hear more of those. So why don't you tell us what happened kind of end of high school and where you went from there, and then we can kind of fill in the gap to the man that you are now.
Sure. High school was a great time. Played sports, played football, basketball, tried baseball, was okay. Decided to drop it. Did drama, enjoyed that a lot. Actually, Pastor Danny was our worship leader, during high school. So that's my first opportunity to actually sing with him as he's playing the guitar. So there was a few of us that did that. And actually here, when it was Zion at the time, in the junior high and high school, Danny did the worship in there. So I always thought we had different paths, right? Danny was the musical guy, and I was not. But in high school, I also had a chance to meet my wife, and which she's the best thing besides Jesus that ever happened to me.
Safe.
So that was, so high school was a lot of fun, right? There was 60 some kids in our graduating class. And then from there you figure out, okay, what are you going to do? I think, well, I know I have a call of God in my life. Multiple people have said that to me. But the specific word was, okay, pastor, right? So what does that look like in my life? I don't know. At that time, when you're a young kid, you're thinking, is that really what I really want to do? That it's a little bit scary, because I wanted to be a trash trunk driver. Remember that.
Totally. I have a funny story that happened not that long ago. Colton, he's in the car with me, and he's all of a sudden curious about different jobs you could have. So he asks me, "What do you like your job being pastor?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, it's fantastic in so many ways." And trying to tell him, it's not like necessarily something I'm like, what'll make a ton of money? I want to be that. It was more of like God connecting the dots and a calling. And he sits there, and I'm thinking he's deeply contemplating it. And he goes, "Dad, what are the better jobs than that?" So I was just thinking trash truck driver, I think, would be close to the top of his list. He's very into power tools, so maybe like lawn care maintenance would be pretty solid for him at this point.
Lawn care, electrician, plumber, why not?
Yeah.
Any of those.
So you have a call in your life, pastor, trying to figure out what the heck does that mean and how do you get there? Do you make decisions thinking, how do I get to there? Or is it more like I'm just going to do the next thing in front of me and keep that in mind in the background?
Well, I think, so when I talk about my life verse is, I think, hopefully many people know this verse, but Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, So that has been mine. So trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. So that has been the verse that I've lived my life by. So, okay, I know I have this calling, and I just take the next step. Okay, what does that mean? So I have an older brother that kind of screwed it up for my younger brother and I, or not my younger, but the brother and I that are closest in age. He went to Occidental College, and as my dad said, screwed around for 4 years. He still did decent there, but what that did for us is we had to go to community college, which totally fine, but so we couldn't go directly into a 4-year university or college.
Okay.
And so that next step for us was, okay, you graduate. At this time, Charm and I were broken up, but that's a whole nother story. But it's go to community college. That's just the next step that you do. And what does that look like? I don't know. Just take whatever classes, general ed classes that you take in front of you. And then at the same time, trying to also be involved in the youth, right? So young adult, trying to figure out what that means. And right at this time, Charm and I are not together. So, so that's just the next step in our lives that we were taking at the time.
Yeah, it seems like that we've kind of zoned in on an age range where a lot of things are kind of all coming together. So you were broken up, which means you had been together. Did you start dating in high school?
Started dating when it was illegal for me. So my parents had this strict age of 16. And then at 15, I'm like, oh, I like this girl. I think I shared in the marriage thing that I was professing my undying love with the islands in Orange here.
Oh, wow.
Long time ago, so 35 years ago now. And so at the time, she was playing dumb and, it can't be me. Why do I want it? This guy's younger than me, But she gave it a shot, and, so we dated in high school. So that was my sophomore year, her junior year. And then until my senior year. So spring of my senior year, we were just growing in two different directions at the time. And then so we broke up, at that time. And then, from there, she was dating other people, I was dating other people, and I didn't think that we would ever go back to each other. But
Here you are.
here I am. But I saw her at church, about 8 months later, maybe 10 months later, and I said, "Wow, she looks hot." Can I say that?
Yeah, you're allowed to.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes we tone it down, but I feel like it's healthy to think your wife's hot.
She's hot. She's now, I won't say her age, but she's hot.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't say that. Also, you keep mentioning leading some worship with students. Are you playing guitar at this point?
No. So my first jumping into music was I was 19, and I got a loaner classical guitar, nylon strings, pretty crappy guitar. And, so someone said, "Hey, just try these chord formations." Okay, I'll try them. So I actually started developing, hey, this is kind of cool. Not necessarily a love for music, but I had a love for worship at the time. At the time was, for me, that really resonated with me was vineyard music at the time was something that I really enjoyed. And so I started playing trying to play some of those things, okay? Because I always believe, all you need are 3 chords in the truth, and that's from U2. I apologize if you don't like U2, but so I started playing the guitar in that way. And then I remember, I'm like, man, if I'm ever really going to start enjoying this, I got to get something better. And then so actually, Danny and we went to Guitar Center, and my mom said, "I'll buy you a guitar, honey." I said, "Okay, well, that's cool." So we went and got my first guitar, which I still have.
Wow.
And, spent a decent chunk of change. Because I think if you're learning and you want to do something, you want it to sound good. Because if you just get something that's basic and not very good, you're just not going to be that interested in continuing. So I got this guitar, still not very good at it. But, I'm just learning and playing chords. And actually, I remember sitting at my home where I grew up, and I think I wrote a song, actually, way back then. And never intending to, but it was just something that came from my heart. So
I love what you said, that you enjoyed the guitar, but you weren't falling in love with the music. You were falling in love with the worship.
Yeah.
And the music was kind of an offshoot of that. I think if I had to pinpoint kind of a growing history and heritage of worship at this church, I think that would be it. That if you have a great heart for worship and you're willing to pursue excellence and, wherever you're at, I feel like there's a great place for you. There has been. I think anybody who's watching knows the amount of faces that come up on this stage and offer their gifts is awesome. I think that's it. And I think you can feel it. I think you could feel that. I think you could feel the difference between a stage full of paid professionals that are musically phenomenal, but kind of lacking maybe the heart of what worship really is.
I would say, like, that main verse that brought clarity to exactly what you're saying is Romans 12, 1, to offer your body as a living sacrifice, right? And I always remember that it was my whole being that I need to offer, right, in worship. And that means my whole life, how I live every day. And not that I'm perfect, but every day knowing that I live for Christ, and I'm hope. I'm an example for people every day, everywhere I go. Okay, I still struggle while I'm driving on the road and all those kinds of things. But so to me, it always came back to also, where's my heart? How's my heart doing? And that's hopefully what you see with the team, because it is a matter of the heart. I think that a Sunday morning worship service, the musical part, to me, it's like the cherry. Hopefully, your week has been lived out in such a way that it's worshiping God. And then a Sunday morning, you can't just help but celebrate. You can't help but just worship, because it's where you are. It's not something you have to do. It's just an expression like, oh, my head and my emotions work together in this. And we're worshiping our Savior because everything He's done for me and saved me from.
Yeah.
So that's what's like, to me, the Sunday morning expression is a culmination of all that.
Yeah, I think the evidence of that is that this church doesn't need a lot of coaxing. People are coming through the door is opening and closing those first couple songs, and then when people get into it, it's like you could probably just step away from the microphone and people would just keep singing for minutes on end. Yeah, it's pretty cool to be a part of. Hey, shameless disclaimer or invitation: if you've never been to Bridge Community Church, you should come. So you are told you can't go to four-year university. You need to go to community college. It sounds like how you were describing it, maybe a little bit of a bummer to you.
Yeah, I think because here I have this calling on my life. I'm thinking, okay, should I go to one of these Christian universities that I'd researched at the time? Because, by the way, you junior highs or high schools, it was very hard to research and find the school you wanted to go to way back when, because it wasn't just on the internet.
Totally.
Didn't exist, except Al Gore invented the internet, but that's a whole nother story. But, sorry. Anyways, so yeah, I wanted to go to something like Biola, which I eventually went to, or at the time it was called SCC College, which is Vanguard, or something like that, right? Maybe Westmont. So one of those schools was always something I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Not necessarily out of state, but so I went through 2 years community college, and at the time, that's growing in your faith, right? I think during that time, and then constantly going to the adult group here, that was one of the most growing times in my life, where the Word, I started reading my Bible more regularly, and all of a sudden the Word just came alive to me. It was like, whoa, God is real.
Yeah.
Just words, jump off the page and you start highlighting. You're like, whoa, that's really cool.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there too, because sometimes I think people, especially in that phase of life, can feel like, wow, things are speeding up. There's a lot of new responsibility I've never had. But I like what you're saying, because you were rooted somewhere. It wasn't like you were just waking up doing your Jesus time alone. You had a group, and you were going to church, and you were serving at church. And it doesn't sound, at least, like one single day God just kind of revealed everything. It was a slow process of you being obedient to those things.
Yeah, it was doing the hard things, but I didn't necessarily have a desire. But I think over time, I was praying for a desire, and God helped me with that. And then all of a sudden I'm like, wow, I'm reading my Bible now. This is cool.
Yeah.
What a cool story.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people. I've definitely had that experience. I had that experience in the 11th grade where I started reading the Bible. And honestly, I was reading for speed. I was not reading for depth, because I had no idea how to do that yet. But I was reading full chapters through the Old Testament. I literally had no idea what it meant, probably more confusing than anything. But it was almost like this magnetic pull to just keep turning the page and keep going that I can't explain outside of the Spirit, because I love reading. I love reading fiction. I've read lots of phenomenal books. I've never had another book where I literally couldn't put it down till 2 or 3 in the morning, except that.
That's cool.
Yeah. So you end up at Biola. How do you end up making that decision?
So Charm and I had, when I saw her at church, and she was hot, right?
It was looking hot. Okay.
So, but before the Biola thing, she's like, we're not going to get back together unless you do this, and this was her plan. And I said, I don't have a plan, so her plan sounds pretty cool. So sign up for the plan. So it was like, okay, I expect a promise ring after a year, an engagement ring after 2 years, and I want to be married in year 3. And again, we were still young, right? I think I was barely 19. And so we did that plan. And in the meantime, she actually was going to, we used to call it Rancho Santiago Orange Campus. Now it's SCC. And so we were both going there. And then actually, when we were thinking about schools, she actually wanted to go to Biola along with me. So I went to Biola in a semester before she did. And, that was a challenge, just because, new campus, new people, or introverted. I didn't live there. I was a commuter, and I didn't really meet people. And so, at the time, I was thinking, okay, what's a major for me? And again, always in the back of my mind, what is this? Just take the next step, but what's this calling mean? And so I kind of landed on this psychology thing. So my major was going to be psychology. And so that was the next step, at Biola. My favorite thing at Biola, though, they make you take 30 units of Bible.
Yeah.
Like I was telling you, how when I started reading the Bible, things were just, jumping out on the pages to me. The 30 units of Bible, some classes, when you're doing Old Testament surveys, pretty dry, or, some of these other things. But man, did the word, again, come alive to me because you go really deep.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite classes were like Acts of the Apostles, and then the book of Romans, where you go deeper into some of these critical books in our faith. And so that was probably one of the best experiences for me, as part of, and then just learning, okay, what's psychology about, because we're all pretty messed up,
It's a good summary of everything you learned in psychology.
Yeah. And what I liked about Biola was Biola, at least when we were there, their mission was not to create somebody who was a psychologist and happened to be a Christian. They're going to develop a Christian psychologist, or they're going to develop a Christian teacher, which Charm went and ended up going into teaching. So they wanted you to live your faith through your profession.
It's so cool to get that training as a young person, because so often, people, even who have gone to church, are 40, 50, trying to figure out, how then do I live out my faith in the career that I've been doing for 20 years, and people might not even know I'm a Christian. But now, how do I go back in and tell them I am? What a leg up it is for young people to just start there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing, I think, when you see the world that way, that we are followers of Jesus who happen to be a teacher or whatever calling that is. I think when you keep it in perspective, I think the boldness and the courage just to live out your faith first, especially in times like this, is, I think, the greatest testament to the power of God, being willing just to say, I'll stand for him no matter what.
Amen. Yep.
So you go to psychology, you find out that, long story short, everyone's messed up. And then what? So you get married, you're on the 3-year plan. You sign in blood and ink. What'd you sign in?
My life, I guess.
There you go.
Right? So we got married before our senior year, even though Charm's a little bit older than me. We were both graduating at the same time. So we get married before our senior year at Biola. So I was 21, she was 23. But still hot, of course. Anyways, so I'm thinking about, oh my gosh, I'm going to graduate. What's the next thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm thinking I'm going to start, looking at seminaries. That's what I'm supposed to do. That's the next step. But then I realized, I'm married. I need to start figuring out, how do I make money? Because, the responsible thing to do would be actually try to start taking care of your family.
Yeah.
And so again, the verse in the back of my head is, trust in the Lord with all your heart, right? Don't try to figure it all out. He's going to direct you. And so just even through the different jobs that I had, like just being a server and those kind of things, he was directing me. And then all of a sudden it hit me like, I don't know, remember what I was doing, researching different things. And then I was looking at, what's similar to psychology without, I wanted to be a marriage family therapist, I thought. But it was another 2 years plus the clinical or whatever you call that, right? So 3 years before you start making money. Yeah. What's something I can do that maybe is faster? And so organizational psychology, which is the study of workplaces. And so I looked at that like, what's similar to that? Oh, human resources. Okay, let's do that. And then so I enrolled at Chapman and then actually got my master's in that. So through that process, so I was still working. I got my first job through the program, and so that was just the next step. And then I guess I should add also during the time before we were married, we were attending as an engaged couple here. They had a marrieds class, and someone said, "Hey, there's a need for, someone to lead worship for the group." I said, "Well, I'll do it. I'm not very good. Again, I only have 3 chords in the truth, but, I said, sure, I'll try." So it was terrible. And, I think at the time I was 20. So that was my first opportunity to lead worship. And yeah, it was, I had the chord sheets laid on the ground and I'm trying to figure out what goes where and fumbling and trying to sing. But it was such a gracious group
Yeah.
that they're just would sing in front, and just, I guess, humor me in a way. But I grew through that,
Yeah.
right? So that was all happening during that time and while I was going to school.
Wow. I think it's like counterintuitive because I think when you live your life really afraid to fail, you don't ever do things like that. Maybe you practice 4 or 5 hours a night for months in advance so that you could show up ready to play some songs flawlessly. But I think it's good insight into what kind of the family of God's supposed to be. It's supposed to be kind of a training ground. Pastorally, we're called to equip the saints for ministry, not find the saints that are already perfect and then give them the resources they need to just do what they're already good at. And that equipping word is hard work in all sorts of capacities. But it's cool that you get to do that now, but also you get to do it from a place of people gave you space to do it.
No, exactly. I mean, one of the coolest things that I ever heard was, the disciples didn't go to seminary, right?
Yeah.
There weren't many writings at the time, except for the law and those kinds of things for them to look at. They weren't experts in all this, but they'd been with Jesus.
Yeah.
And that was the coolest thing to think about, that their training was spending time with Jesus and listening to his teachings and then putting them into practice. And so that's what I think about, the team here. Yes, the best experience you can have is just do it. You're going to fail.
Yeah.
That's okay. It's a safe place. And, every Sunday, no matter how much you practice, I was talking about this with people earlier, but every Sunday I still have butterflies because it's like, I hope I don't mess up, before service. And it's, that's just where I'm at.
Yeah. I'm not musical, but I do know for me, some of the best learning experiences is messing up and then finding out how gracious people actually are.
Yep.
That they actually are not holding you to the standard of perfection because they know Jesus and they know they're sinners just like you. I feel like that was a tough lesson to learn in the sense that I didn't want to learn it. I was very resistant to it. But man, you say something dumb, and the second it comes out of your mouth saying a sermon, like, not only do I not believe that, but everyone's looking at you like you don't believe that and that's wrong. And then someone graciously corrects it, and you realize like, oh, that was it. I was waiting for like the rotten fruit to come my way, and it doesn't come.
Right.
Yeah. So clearly you're learning guitar better. Still 3 chords and the truth, but I'd assume the chords are getting changed quicker and more smoothly over time.
And I'm learning new ones.
Awesome.
Wow. Yeah, I'm learning new ones, and I'm learning now. Now, again, I'm not musically trained, right? So I'm just learning this as I listen to CDs because, yes, you junior hires, back in the day, you bought CDs or even a cassette tape
Oh, yeah.
of worship songs, and then you had to go to a music store because it's not online because it didn't exist, and you had to actually figure out how to play these songs too. So things weren't as accessible back then.
Funny story. This last Wednesday was the youth group talent show, and Caleb Lees was hosting it. Shout out Caleb, he's awesome. But he was introducing an act, and he was like, back in the olden days when people had to watch things on DVD. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that doesn't seem like the olden days. I was telling him, I can remember when my family got the first VHS that did the power rewind. Remember that? Where you could rewind your video in like 90 seconds. Otherwise, it was like you had to rewind it and like go make yourself lunch and come back 30 minutes later.
Yep.
And I remember that was like, the whole world has changed, friends. We can have sleepovers and watch movies so quickly now.
What changed my life was when you could take a little cassette tape and actually record from the radio. And you're like, I didn't have to wait for my favorite song to come back on. You could record it.
I can remember when I first became a Christian, I guess technically you could find music on Napster or whatever, but not Christian music. And a lot of the places that you could buy music in my town, you couldn't get Christian music. And I was new to it. So one of the things I learned was I really liked going to like these Christian music festivals. Uh, I honestly didn't love the festival part because I don't like crowds. But what I liked is you could go to the merch table and every single artist's CDs were there. And it was like a gold mine because you couldn't get those anywhere else. Back then, it was super sketchy. Remember when you could first pay with a credit card online and you had no idea what was on the other end? Is this website just some guy who's stealing your credit card? Like, I'm not going to risk it. So I remember that being like, wow, this is going to change the game. Go to the merch table and you could buy 60 different artists' CD.
I would go to the Pink Lady here in Orange. So some people may know what that is if those tens and tens of listeners actually went there. But went to the Pink Lady, and so at the time, Vineyard was one of the bigger ones that was producing a lot of. They became a machine, and maybe they shouldn't have written as many songs, but that's just my opinion. But anyways, so they always had new CDs, and then music accompanied with it, and then you could sign up for their quarterly. Then they would every quarter would produce a new CD, and you would get the accompanied music.
When you say accompanied music, that means like the sheet music you
The
could
chord
play.
sheets. The chord sheets, yeah, they would have in the songbook along with the CD. So, I would say a lot of at the time worship leaders were similar to me, maybe not formal training, and were learning, listening to the CD, and then playing with it with the chord sheets.
That's awesome. Now, this is a time because I'm thinking of the timeline. Maybe we can get back to this in a little while, but this is also, if I remember correctly, the moment in church history that they call the worship wars. Is that right? Where there's very much an old school that's probably a little resistant to all of a sudden brand new songs quarterly. Is that more or less true?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit later than that, but I think that was probably the start of it when you had. You still had more traditional hymns, and then you had at the time it would have been Vineyard Music plus Hosanna Integrity, so like the Calvary Chapel kind of music. So I don't think we got to the worship wars just yet because there wasn't such the radical emphasis on drums and guitar, and not yet. Even here, it was still very much led via piano, even though they had different elements, brass and drums but it was more still driven by the piano.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so that's a total rabbit trail we'll come back to.
I know we should, though, for sure.
Okay, so you go to college, you get married. Where I think we left off is you're like, oh, I'm married now. I should do in your words, the responsible thing and find a job. So you find HR. So what's fascinating to me is when I think of I don't know, maybe secular vocations, I think HR might be one of the most right places to be a follower of Jesus. Very pastoral. Like literally your job is to think about how to best serve the people.
And that I didn't, probably later in my career, I figured like, wow, what I do really is pastoral because you're dealing with the junk of people on the job, right? Mm. And people are people. That's just what we are. And, in some of my first jobs, you're dealing with people that are either fighting, stealing, not doing their job, belligerent, those kinds of things. You're dealing with those issues. Sometimes it leads to termination. Sometimes it leads to discipline, whatever that may be. But yeah, and then you're trying to find people. So that's the other thing. You're trying to find people. And I think, again, very pastoral, right? And then you're helping people find themselves. That's the other thing about what HR can be.
Mm. Yeah, and you've been doing it for a long time now.
I've been doing it for 27 years.
Yeah. If you could, what would you say were some of the early, maybe the learning curve speed bumps that you learned just in engaging with people? Because I'm thinking of you as a young post-grad. I got to imagine some of these people fighting are like 40 years old. To a 22, 23-year-old, this could be an intimidating dynamic.
Well, I worked in a warehouse environment at the time.
Okay.
So they were probably similar to my age.
Okay.
However, not knowing their background. an understanding, when what I realized, like, okay, as an HR person, this was in the city of Commerce, kind of a rough area around. Some of these people aren't the best kind of people. And then so when you let somebody go, you terminate them for fighting. They're like, I know where you park. And you're like, whoa, okay. I got to watch my back because, you're getting threatened potentially. They just like to talk, like that. But, so that would have been, kind of a learning experience. Know who the people that you're actually serving. Yeah. And what I try to do was serve people. And so I try to have some sort of relationship and not be, people view HR as transactional. You go there, you get a service, and it's it's not warm. It's not a relationship. I wanted to actually serve these people. Again, another kind of pastoral kind of thing, to where, hey, what can I do to help your job be better, make you better at your job? And so those were the key things and learnings. Again, not made a lot of mistakes in doing that with people. And then people got angry, but that's how you learn.
So you're newly married. You're serving in some capacity here. I said something that just turned your phone on Siri, so the government's now listening to us. I don't know what I said. All of a sudden, Siri's like, "What can I do? What can I do for you?" Newly married, serving. Let's go back to now that you're an adult, you're married, like responsibilities and things come fast in that period of life. What are some of those early things that you think began to equip you long-term to not just do HR, although that's very pastoral at its core, but lead worship ultimately here on the stage at Bridge?
Do I share that? One thing you asked is one of those. What are those major tentpole events that affect your lives?
Yeah.
I think maybe I'll come back to that and just talk about, because, chronologically at the time, Charm always wanted to be a mom. That was her heart's desire and goals, to be a mom.
Yeah.
And so at the time, I get my first HR job. I'm finishing up school, and she finds out she's pregnant, and we're, I think I'm 24 at the time. She's 25. And so she always wanted to be a mom. And so that's a process in and of itself. And maybe I didn't feel like I was ready to be a dad at the time, but I know that was the plan. So I signed up for the plan, right? Yeah. So during that time, pregnancy on women is very difficult. Yeah. Men, you be there for your women during that time, and you do whatever they need, okay? I'm talking to the men.
Amen.
But it can be very difficult. But so we had a situation where she was 38 weeks pregnant, and she's like, at that time we had already named, what our daughter was going to be. She's like, you know what, I'm not feeling Kennedy move. And so one night I'm like, no big deal. It's probably not a big deal, because I feel like my job sometimes, maybe I downplay too much, but is to be more calm as she's feeling anxious. So she's like, she's not moving. And she's like, however, I have an appointment with the doctor tomorrow. I said, okay, great. So that night in my reading, and I have to read this. This is probably, one of the worst verses, I think, in my mind to get at a time like this. But I'm a person that I think, obviously, Jesus knows who we are, knows our personalities.
Right.
And I'm a person that needs to know before I need to know, so I can mentally prepare. So if I get a little bit emotional, I apologize, but it's 2 Corinthians chapter 1, starting in verse 3, and it just says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion, the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. For just as we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ, so also our comfort abounds through Christ. If we are distressed, it is for your comfort and salvation. If we are comforted, it is for your comfort, which produces in you patient endurance of the same sufferings we suffer." So I'm sitting there with that And I'm like, okay, I know our baby's gone. However, that's not something I'm going to share in the moment. And then, then the next morning we go to the appointment, and then they're looking for the heartbeat. You know, they do that, whatever that thing is to check for the heartbeat, and they can't find it. And they're like, well, we need to schedule an ultrasound. I'm sure everything's okay. Just relax. And then, so they do this high def ultrasound. And this was in 1997. And then they, everything Charm already knew. She was doing the ultrasound by herself with the technician and just sobbing during that time, I know. And I'm in the waiting room with her mom and just knowing the confirmation, what had just occurred, that, our baby had passed away.
Now, for people who maybe don't have kids, it's a very sad story, but 38 weeks is just days from being considered full term. And any miscarriage of a child is devastating, but you're not talking about 4 or 5, 6 weeks. You're talking about a fully formed child.
Yep.
So I got to imagine, just in the dynamics of marriage, both devastated but in very different ways. How did the two of you kind of navigate the grief? Because people grieve differently, but now you're grieving something that's common to both of you.
So immediately they sent us home. There wasn't room for us to deliver. And so they said, we're going to send you home, and then we'll have you, we can get a private room for you the next day. Okay, that seems to make sense. So I remember that afternoon or evening, I just said, honey, Satan's trying to tear us apart. And in that moment, I just prayed. I said, whatever we have to do to make sure that our marriage makes it, because most marriages don't through tragedy. And I just said, there's a bigger purpose for our lives, so we need to make sure we make it. So I just prayed. And I just realized at that time, the road for her would be a lot different than for me, like what you were saying. So my road was, Jesus says, in this world you will have trouble, but I have overcome the world. That was that was my belief, but I didn't carry this child inside of me.
Yeah.
So while it's devastating to me, and it's like the whole time we're like, hey, God, even though we know she's dead, you can still cause a miracle and you get all the glory. Even though you can still do this, I still had hope until we delivered, right?
Yeah.
So that's the way I was thinking. And she's like, this has been the only thing that I've ever wanted. I can't trust God, and I don't want to tell her story. Okay. So, so my job was to be there and do whatever she needed at the time, because it was a challenging, it's still one of those things that pops up today, and it's been, 26 and a half years.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to imagine, just in the dynamics of knowing your family as well, of being the first experience with pregnancy. I think sometimes when I hear stories of miscarriages, sometimes when people have a child already, you kind of get caught up in the tunnel vision of, I got to care for the child. But I have to imagine there was some pretty just kind of dark loneliness in that season of anticipating a new life and then it not being there.
Well, you do all the hard work. You take all the pills, you grow and you get fat, and you do all the work, and then you deliver full term, and you're like, I don't have anything now. I'm empty. And so that was for her especially. She delivered a beautiful 5-pound, 12-ounce, 22 inches long baby girl, Kennedy Marie, on August 22nd, 1997.
Yeah. Yeah. And I got to imagine a lot of life just seems like it just screeches to a halt. But like you were saying earlier, you're now post college, there's responsibilities, there's work to go to, and there's things to do. So uh, maybe instead of just walking more through that experience, how did you experience God in that season of life?
Well, I would say, I mean, a few things, right? Even though you're going through a tragedy, my work said, hey, we're going to give you a couple weeks off, but, at that time, I didn't have any paid time off. They did a collection and raised money so I could stay home for a few weeks. Pretty cool thing. That was pretty incredible. Through the delivery, our original OB was on vacation, and God sent this incredible man who was a believer and prayed with us, read scripture to us. I mean, all of those, and then checked in on Charm. I mean, some of those incredible things. The nursing staff that were there, and this was at St. Joe's, incredible. And so we were surrounded. You could feel God's arms all around you.
Yeah.
Which was very cool. Those were the miracles that we had at the time. Even Danny was gone, on YWAM, and he happened to be back at the time. So he came and he was there, at the time. So those were the things, like during those times you feel God's, when God talks about Israel, how he wants, like a hen wants to bring them under his wings. That's what we felt like. We were in God's wings, protected at the time. Tragic, terrible situation. But that's what I felt. God being there and just surrounding us with his love and still giving us hope. Like, okay, you've gone through this, but I got better things for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, well, thank you for sharing that, first of all. I think just the reality that things can happen 26, is that how many years ago?
26 and a half.
27. And even, as you just said, like, sometimes it still sneaks up on you. I think even in the devastation, those are the things I think that draw people into worship, when they feel like the person leading us has also lived life in a way that's authentic and real. Even if they don't know the story, they can sense that there's something where we're in this together. And I definitely see that. So kind of moving forward, if you're ready to move forward from it, clearly that's a huge, huge hit. I mean, I don't think we need to exaggerate, but there are a lot of people who go through their whole life from start to finish and not have a tragedy quite like that. So now you're walking through that in your mid-20s, and you got a lot going on, a job, a young wife. We still haven't got to you learning more than 3 chords yet, so I think that's coming. What happens next?
Well, from there, it's just taking every day the next step. For Charm, it was devastation. For me, it was trying to rebuild my trust in God, right? Because not to say that I wasn't affected would be wrong. And so it's just, what is that next step that you have, God, for us in our lives? And I think during that time, I go back to work. She actually was a teacher at the time. She went back to work. Sometimes distractions are good.
Yeah.
And I will also say that sometimes they're bad because then you don't deal with fully what you should. So that was the next steps we took. And, the doctor said, I think you should wait a year before you should try and get pregnant again. And I said, or Charm's like, I'm not doing that. She's like, once I can, we're going to get pregnant again. And so it took us a few months. So we got pregnant in either probably February of 1998.
And most people listening to this will know who that is. That's Bailey. And what was that like after your experience? Was that pure joy? Was there a little fear, a little terror about what could be? I'd imagine even towards the end of being pretty anxious to meet this baby.
So the next 9 months were hell because you're dealing with fear.
Yeah.
All of the emotions, anxiety. God took my first baby. Why would he take this one? Just those are just the raw emotion of it all.
Yeah.
Up until the day, and then we never wanted to get to 38 weeks again, even with all the kids that we've had now.
Yeah.
So, our doctor said, the same doctor that delivered Kennedy was going to now deliver Bailey. And, Charm said, I want to be induced. Okay, we'll do that. So at 36 weeks, Bailey Elaine then was born.
Wow. Yeah, even as you're saying that and you're smiling, I'm thinking about the first time I ever saw Colton and thinking like, wow, this is awesome and scary, and my life's never the same. There's no going back, only forward. What was being a young dad like for you?
It was exciting and scary all at the same time. It almost seems like it's not real because you're like, can I handle this? I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess you get the strength, and you do the things you need to do. But it was incredible. It was one of the best experiences where you've felt incredible loss, and then you have incredible gift. Bailey is our gift.
Yeah.
Bailey helped bring healing to both Charm and I, mostly. I would say both to Charm, but also to both of us. It brought that healing. And, she's a gift to our church here now, as everybody would know, hopefully. But, man, at the time, she was such a gift.
Wow. Where are you at with being at church and leading worship at this time?
So I did get back into that, and I think just prior to that, the marriage class, we stopped meeting for a time. It just kind of, some things run their courses, and that stopped. And so I actually was helping the youth at the time. So with Danny, I was helping the youth. He was the youth pastor at the time. And so I was helping lead worship with the youth. So I just do the next thing. I just do my job. So it's like, why wouldn't God use me in this time? So I go and start leading worship on Wednesday nights with the youth and retreats and things like that. And then, now I think once we have Bailey, I have another job.
Yeah.
And that, and it was very stressful until Bailey was born at this job. So it was a lot of stress. And, I just started that new job. So the things you don't want to do, you don't want to start a new job, have kids, or then have Christmas. Those are the threes. And then maybe you have a heart attack. But I didn't have a heart attack then, so.
I'm grateful for that. I can remember thinking like, let's see, Colton was born when I was 31. So I feel like I kind of had a feel for adult life. I was totally ready, anticipating that this is going to be a lot of work. The thing I didn't anticipate, and it's nothing someone can tell you with words and you will know, is all of that is expected of you, and you're not going to sleep. And unless you've been like a Navy SEAL or something, you've probably never experienced that lack of sleep. We used to make fun of each other to keep it light. I have a file in my phone where I used to track everything Natalie would say when she would wake up, like in the stupor of no sleep. But she would tell me the things I would say. One time I woke up and I told her, it's going to be okay. This earthquake will end. It will be fine. And she's like, what are you talking about? And I told her, just stay where you're at. We're all safe. She said, we're not having a stinking earthquake, you idiot. We just need to change a diaper. That's a rough season. But
I'm someone that needs sleep. And so, yes, that was difficult.
Yeah. So you're also talking about a season. You told me you wanted to go back to the worship war thing. We'll get there in a second. But you're also talking about, in my understanding, a season of church ministry here at what was then Zion, which was maybe okay at that period, but it was about to speed up and get a little wild there. So from your vantage point, you're volunteering, leading worship, you're going to church here, you have connections with young marrieds, you're a new dad, you've had this traumatic thing that's going to impact the rest of your life all in one, and then some stuff starts to happen here. So in your own words, what kind of ends up happening?
Well, at the time, Pastor John was retiring. Mm-hmm. We were looking for a new pastor at the time, and you're thinking, okay, that's cool. That would be the next step, logical step.
Yeah.
And so I was still doing things with the youth. Danny was the youth pastor. Occasionally we would do things, we call it big service, right? They let the young people do things, in big church. So occasionally we do that. So we get this new pastor. Thought it was cool. So it lasted about 2 years and didn't work out. And I think at the time, so I was ready to leave.
Ready to leave the church.
Ready to leave the church at the end of that. And then, so Charm and I were both kind of there, but we weren't going because we didn't felt fully released yet. And then I just started getting this thing. I just felt God speaking to me like, just wait. But Charm's like, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Get me out of here. And then we talked about this. So there just happened to be a woman's retreat. And then I'm praying that God would change her heart, that I just feel like there's something we need to wait during this season. And so she comes back from this women's retreat and she's like, yeah, God told me that we need to stay. And I just started laughing. I said, well, I've been praying that that's supposed to be what happens, that we both stay here. And so we were without a pastor for a time. And then I don't remember exactly how it all came about, but basically someone got a word that Danny's to be the pastor, the senior pastor. And so that was at that time. So he became the senior pastor. And then shortly thereafter, he's like, hey, man, he's like, why don't you come partner with me? Why don't you come do the music? I'm like, dude, are you sure? I just do things for youth, man. I'm not sure about this. I'm not sure I'm confident in doing something like this. But as I do with things, I just said yes.
Yeah, like you keep saying, you just do the next thing.
Just do the next thing. And I said, okay. Well, yeah, sure, we'll do it.
Do you feel like not the version of you that's sitting here today, but that version of you when you said yes, if you had known kind of what you were walking into, do you think you still would have said yes?
Yes. And I know that sounds crazy maybe to some people, because yes, it can be difficult. But again, it's like, the other thing I was thinking about was God requires obedience over sacrifice. And if you don't do what he's telling you to do, come on. So that's why I said, okay, I'm just going to do it. And then we'll figure it out as we go. It's the best training ground anyway, right?
Right.
So.
What were those early days of going from, because you were talking about doing Wednesday nights to, like, even in your own words, in your mid-20s, going to big church was kind of like this big thing. What was it like for you to go from that to all of a sudden you're leading the worship in big church all the time?
It was, again, didn't seem real, because you go from, my biggest thing was, okay, we're now going from piano-led, more music, to guitar-led, because that's what I played. Okay, now I knew about 10 chords at this time, okay?
Okay, cool.
And could play in different keys. And so that in and of itself, just changing the main instrument is a challenge. And then we went from having a choir on every Sunday to not. So that's a big change as well, which presents different challenges as well. So I don't think I played that much different songs than were done already, because the prior worship leader was more temporary anyway. And so that, I was thinking about that, and that was a challenge. It was thinking, okay, hopefully they'll accept who I am, and hopefully they'll see I really want to do my best, and I really want to have God work through me.
Yeah. If you could go back, maybe some people who are still around, or some names that people would know, who are people that really affirmed you, that stood out to you in that season of giving you the shot in the arm of, like, you can do this. I believe in you. Thank you for leading us in worship. Who are those voices that really spoke confidence into you?
I mean, my in-laws for sure. I call him Craig. People call him Gary. And sometimes they confuse the name, but that's okay. But Marlene and Craig, my parents, of course. My parents actually didn't attend the church at the time.
Okay.
But they were great supporters as well. And more just the peer group. When I had, at the time, it was Scott and Linda, Chester and Teresa and Jenny and Greg and those people that were around. They're like, you can do this. You can do this. So those are the people that really became our support structure.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there was others like Bob and Renee Tripp and people like that were just instrumental in that support during the time.
Yeah. What was kind of the I'm just curious from my own. I feel like this is like a story that hasn't been filled in because I've heard kind of the pastoral switches and all of that. But what was kind of the temperature in the room? Was it similar to what we have now? Was it? I'm just trying to think because when you stand up to preach, for instance, and I think 6 or 7 years ago, it was a very different feeling than it even is now. What was kind of the state of worship? Not in a judgmental way, but how would you describe? And also, what year are we talking here?
Well, we're talking.
2003,
I guess
4?
it's. No, I want to say was it 2000?
Okay.
I mean, we're maybe 2001. I think we've been doing this 23 years.
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
Anyways, I'll just say this: when you touch people's music, they don't like it. That's the only way I can say it plainly. So the environment when you touch the music is challenging potentially, and so you have some people that love it, some people that are like, I'm not sure yet.
Yeah. Interesting. It is an interesting dynamic. I remember I didn't become a Christian until I was like 15 and a half, 16 years old. But I didn't really know anything about Christianity outside of the little church I was going to. And even that, I was more like just in the youth group, So when I went to college and we were learning about like church trends and these sorts of things, I had never heard the word worship war. I had no idea that there was wars of that kind. So when you just said, people they don't like when you touch their music. I feel like I only knew the textbook version of that, of, churches splitting and planting a new church to stay more traditional. Or I don't know what your thoughts are, but I remember reading very early on and having this discussion that you got to choose. Are you going to be contemporary or traditional? Because if you try to walk the middle, everybody will be unhappy. And I remember thinking, like, that just seems like very, like, just throwing in the towel. Like, there's got to be unity in the body somewhere. But even in young church circles, when I was even in seminary 10 years ago, was very much, you got to choose one or the other. Music will divide, which is so fascinating because it's also the thing that brings people together. So it seems like maybe the enemy likes to use music.
Well, he was the first worship leader, if we call it that. But
I didn't.
Why wouldn't he, right? So in heaven, we'll say, before he fell. There's two thoughts on that. And I'll show one experience personally here, and then the other one just with regards to the way I view musical worship. As I'll be specific about that, because music to me, or worship, is more than just the music. One thought about here specifically, an example or a memory that I have, which is a great one actually now, was a person that came up to me and said, I didn't like it when you took over. But I started praying. I prayed, God, either remove him or you change me. And she's like, God, change me. And I've never worshiped more deeply than I have with you. And I thought, wow, that is so cool. That was one of the coolest things that I experienced. So maybe I was helping people see things differently.
Yeah.
And then that kind of leads me to my next point, which is, there's, a couple things I've read, like a lot of the different worship leaders that I looked up to growing up over time was like, like a Matt Redman, who's just a solid person, Paul Baloche, and Eddie Espinoza. Some people may know who that is. Just, he's been a solid mentor in my life. Mm-hmm. But just those kinds of people. Worship is about the heart. And if you forget that, man, you're missing something. So when we talk about music, it should never be about the style. It should never be about the person. It should always be about the heart. is your heart coming to worship Jesus, or is it not? So, one example that I've been reading a few different books, the author said this. They went to a worship conference, and he was sitting next to an individual, and the guy playing, not very good. His guitar was out of tune, didn't sing great, and so he look and turns, and he starts talking to the guy next to him. He's like, "Wasn't that terrible?" And the guy's looking at him. That was beautiful. His heart was awesome. I never worshiped so deeply. So you have two different perspectives with the same thing going on. And then so the guy who was very critical said, "Man, I realized it was about my heart, and that no matter where I go, whether or not I'm going into a traditional service or contemporary, am I magnifying Jesus in my heart or not? So it doesn't matter whether or not I'm singing a hymn or whether or not I'm singing a contemporary chorus. There's room for both. So where is your heart in this? That's really what I think about this. Sure, we all prefer different styles, but hopefully we get to the point where it's about we're glorifying God no matter what."
Yeah, amen to that. I think I was just thinking as you were talking is you've kind of created a culture around worship that maybe a lot of people don't get to see. And I think I have a front row seat because I hear early before people arrive. Talk a little bit about, especially in this season, how many different skill sets and personalities and faces, because it's so cool if you come on one Sunday, then you come the next Sunday. Our worship team looks very different week to week, and that's not an accident. That's by design. So, talk a little bit about. And I know you. I know that you're going to say like, "Well, I didn't create it. God created it. And we're just doing the next thing." But talk about some of the steps that it takes, especially for young people, to be raised up and put in a position to not just be part of it, but to lead, and to lead well and to grow while also expecting excellence and pursuing it.
Well, I think like right now, where we're at, you have a certain level, right, of competency. And so a Sunday morning for us isn't necessarily a place where you learn. I mean, you continually grow and learn, right? But prior to that is, you attract people who like excellence, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing is where you attract people that just enjoy playing and then enjoy worshiping. But I always start, I have a vision for the worship team. It's, live a life of worship that models and inspires worship in others. So if we're not living that, and I didn't specifically say music, it was that life, right?
Yeah.
So if you're not first living that life, and that's with the team, everybody there, and then, I don't care if you're good. I would rather have somebody who's a heart after Jesus. That's pretty good, than somebody who's really good that is just causing division or that is just a challenge to work with all the time. So hopefully that's what you see with the team here. You have everyone on the team. They want to be here. They want to serve Jesus first. They want to serve the congregation because that's what we're here to do. They want to help others experience just that heavenly experience we get to have during our musical worship. That's what you have, and you want a unified team. You want people that enjoy, that have each other's back, because on a Sunday morning, most people, 99% of people aren't going to notice, but we're going to make some mistake, and that's okay, But you have people that cover for each other, which is really cool.
Yeah, I think one thing that is kind of hard for people sometimes is you set the tone of worship, and in the tone of worship, you sometimes don't get the personality because it's not about you; it's about God, right? But I think one of the things I love is how much you guys just like each other, just the banter and the fun in between songs and the jokes, and clearly you know each other, you love each other, you're here for each other. I think it's one of the coolest things to see because I think some of my church experiences were very much like we leave music to the professionals. And if you treat it like your workplace, you come in, you punch your card, you do what you got to do, and then you're off. And that is not the culture here. And I think the end result is people who can, whether they can pinpoint it or not, they come in, they settle in, they look around, and they recognize this is like a real place of worship. Like you said, it's people expressing their heart. And I love that. I think it's so awesome. So
One thing I forgot to mention is freedom. So when you have somebody like Brad, or like Taylor, who plays the saxophone, they love freedom
is
to
that what that
express.
is? It's a saxophone? Shoot, I've been calling it trumpet and clarinet for a good 5 years. He loves when I do it too, so you should
Apologize, Taylor, if you're listening. People who, in their own right, are just like far above anything I've ever experienced or will ever be, but they love to serve and they love that freedom to where they're worshiping while they're playing, and they know where to fill in the gaps where we're not playing at that time or whatnot. So they like that freedom to where they can express themselves before God, using their instruments, and they're just so good at doing that,
So I didn't know that. Are you saying it's almost built in for them just to do what they think is best in the moment?
Yeah. I mean, of course they prepare, right? But in the moment, yes, they have the freedom. I'm not telling them what to do. They're free to do what they want to do. And that's part of trusting your team, is you're trusting that other person that, first of all, they're prepared, but second, that they're going to do the right thing in the moment. And they are, because they're listening to God.
Yeah. One thing I think is important for people, especially if they're just coming to church and they love the worship, for instance. I think one thing I've tried to do a lot, and I know you do it well too, is to recognize there's also a secondary part of worship that you are taking in, and that's a group of people who are technically wizards on sound and video and all of those things. What would you say has been kind of the biggest kind of advancement on that front of instead of like, hey, we want a sweet YouTube channel, of, hey, how would you use the gift that God gave you as someone who knows cameras like the back of your hand to use that in worship? How have you seen that grow here?
Well, exponentially. I think you start with someone who really knows what they're doing, and I think what we do as we get older, we train others, and that's what we should do. Pass on those gifts.
Yeah.
So I think on the technical side, where 20 years ago, I'm making copies with a transparency, and we have overhead machines, and you're like, hey, would you just mind just putting the words up when we get to that song? Totally different, right, compared to what we are doing now. So I think you need people with a certain level that are good at what they do to help others, and you're part of the worship. But you come, and what I love about this team is they come and they watch and they see what we're doing, and especially the people that are doing the overheads, as we call them, or the technology, whatever you call them, or the lighting. They're trying to match it to what we're doing, which is cool. So I can see it in their heart that they really enjoy what they're doing along with what we are.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's got to be so gratifying and just cool for you to look to your left and your right from time to time and see a daughter and a son, especially considering the experience that you've shared, that now you have adult children who sometimes you're just playing in the background and they're leading in worship. What's that feeling like for you?
I think as God would feel when we're obedient, like a proud papa, right? It's because there's, I don't know, many years where it's just me doing it, right? And I always had some people team, like Lisa Harris, who, shout out to Lisa, she's the best. She's awesome.
Amen.
But she's been on the team forever. So I've always had people like that to some degree, and then, the gifts God gives you are pretty credible. You got to make sure you use those, right?
Yeah.
But then the gifts that they're unexpected through your children, those are just blessings, man. Like, driving down when we used to live in Corona, Parker's in the back seat. We're listening to a song with a beat, and he's doing this with his head. He's like rocking back and forth. He's like, yeah. I'm like, it's a good beat, right? He's all, yeah, Dad, that's a good beat. And his head just rocking back and forth. I'm like, that kid's got something. And then Bailey, when she's like 2, maybe less than 2, is just humming in perfect pitch this 101 Dalmatians intro song. And I'm like, what is that? That's very cool. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And then, now to fast forward to, Parker's just getting home for being on tour with, a worship team, and Bailey leads here.
Yeah.
Those giftings that God has instilled in them and is still growing. And I don't even have to be up here playing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And then I'm worshiping with my kids in that way
Yeah.
is incredible.
I think as a young dad, I think the thing that I like about it is there's never been one time that I can remember where, especially those two, have ever been introduced or come across as like Ben's kid daughter or kid son. It's Bailey is a girl, now woman, who is leading us in worship, and whether she's Ben's daughter or not is irrelevant to what we're doing today because God's gift is in her and she's leading.
Yeah.
And it's always felt like a level of excellence. So there's never been a feeling of like, oh, the only reason they're up there is because they're related to Ben. So you know that verse, train up a child in the way that they should go. I know people have picked up on the way that they should go is not the way you want them to go. It's the way God called them. I think that's the fruit of your fatherhood. That's honestly, I was a little blown away that you told me you knew three chords when you were 19. It's almost like the saying yes to God was cool for you, and it's been such a blessing to our church, but it also was generational in saying yes, which is pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, and the cool thing about that is even to today, the reason I lead worship is because I feel God's pleasure. I don't play the guitar because it's something that I want to sit in front of the TV and mess around with. I do it, at least for me, specifically for leading worship.
Yeah. What would you say to someone, I could imagine, but what would you say to someone who maybe loves music and has felt like I love to worship? Maybe they're a teenager that's never picked up an instrument before. What would you say to them?
I would say pick up an instrument. Anybody can do anything with practice, what I've learned. I mean, even in my later adult years, I took lessons, and I had to learn about tempos, and I had to learn about changing keys and all those kinds of things. Just pick it up, stick with it. Anybody can learn anything. Stick with it for a year. If you don't like it then, move to something else. But just try.
I had one final question for you, and then we can kind of head for the finish line. But you said when you were a little kid, you got a word that you were called to be a pastor. And it seems like in some regard, you kind of just slowly, one step at a time, backed into it by saying yes. At what point in this journey did you pause and think like, oh, that calling is what I'm doing? Was it the moment that you were leading with youth? Was it Danny asked you, hey, come do this with me in big church, as you called it? Was there ever a moment where you just paused and realized like, oh, I'm exactly what God called me into doing?
Well, it specifically, it would have been about 10, 12 years ago. I should remember this date, but I don't. When I officially became ordained, when Danny said, hey, I would like to, I think it would be cool if we ordain you. And I said, I always thought our lives would be different, Danny. I thought you would be the music person, and maybe I would have done something different. But it's just how we flip-flop. It's so interesting because Danny, for all you that don't know, Danny was the music guy, and he still leads incredible times of worship. And I learned a lot from him. So that's why it was always strange to me. So when he approached me and I said, man, I know there's more scrutiny that goes on, in that level or that title of pastor. And so I didn't take it lightly, and Charm and I really prayed about it. And when we did that, and I just said the next thing, I said yes. And it was just, I think it was, I saw God smile and say, yes, that's what I've called you to be. And then, so it's just, it was a specific time in an event, but it was just a really cool experience that eventually came. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't something that I went to school and then became. It was something that I think like life, people forget that it's a process, and you go through many steps to get to where you are going and you never finish until you die. So I'm just in the middle of that now, and it's an honor for me to serve
Yeah.
here specifically at this church.
You know what? I said that was the final question, but I have one more because I think maybe people don't even know this about you, but your HR background is not just at your place of work. You also do a fair bit in different seasons here. I've experienced it. I remember before I even worked here, I had a phone call with you, and it was very much, I don't even know who that guy is. I can't remember his face because I met so many people. I don't 100% know who I'm talking to, but whoever that is either totally taking me for a ride, which I doubt, or they legitimately like want to set me up to succeed. I've had moments of, hey, let's talk about what would be wise planning for retirement, and just things like simple things where you think, oh, I haven't paused to think of those things, but Ben already knows all the technical stuff. So tell people what you do kind of behind the scenes.
Well, besides my normal, job, I help the church doing, the HR stuff. And HR can mean a lot of different things, right? But specifically for the church, I help with the benefits, with the compensation, in hiring a person, right? So kind of helping set all that up. So anything insurance related or retirement related, I help the church just navigate some of those things. Like helping set up a retirement plan for the church. We have a retirement plan, which we should, which is very cool.
Yeah.
Because not a lot of churches can do that. So we were able to do that. So I just like helping people in that respect, making sure that they feel that, first of all, you've made a good decision and that you're supported.
Have you ever paused and thought, in the world of churches, people might not know this, but in church world, most churches experience a pretty high rate of turnover. Maybe not in like the senior leadership, but like support staff and youth work, a lot of turnover. Have you ever paused and just thought, you know, it's not 100% you doing HR, but in large part, you've created and helped create a culture and a system where we have almost no turnover. We have people who like show up every day, like in the middle of a week, and they like love to work here. And some of it is God's calling, but some of it is the people that are here love each other. Good personality fits, good gift fits. Have you ever paused and thought about that?
Well, there's a business leader that said this statement, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Because if people don't like where they're going...
I'm sorry, culture eats strategy.
Strategy for breakfast.
Okay.
So business strategy, whatever, church strategy, whatever. Because if people don't like where they're going, or if they don't like the people they work with, or the culture is either it doesn't have this balance of, that people can have a life and they still want to work hard and do good stuff, it's not going to work. So that's why, that statement still, it rings true here, because when you create, and, you got to give props to the people that are here and Danny on that, is that most of all, the culture is what creates the magic.
Yeah, totally. Well, as we wrap up, I was thinking of a couple things. I hope you're not too uncomfortable, but I usually affirm people in what I see and then leave you with a verse. In fact, I don't have a verse for you, but I have something else. I was just thinking about you, and I was thinking about some of the stuff you discussed. I went through right here as a young guy who was engaged when I got here. I got, in a couple year span, got married, finished seminary, also had a traumatic miscarriage event, all kind of in this packed moment. And I remember looking back and thinking, like, who were those pivotal people? And I think when I think about you, especially early on, I think of one of the best icebreakers I know. Sometimes it can be awkward for someone to be like fun and funny and then flip a switch and be serious. You have just an innate ability to do those things, to put people's guardrails down, just like laugh together and connect with people in a really fun way. I think my wife has experienced that with you and always ends up just recanting what she talked to you about and just thinks you're hilarious. But I remember feeling like, oh, these are like real people. Ben is a real person that I really like to talk to. You know, his relationship with Jesus is raw and open, and you can like actually know about it. It's not like kind of stodgy and heavy, and then like, oh, funny Ben. It's like the same person. So I've always appreciated that about you. And I've talked to so many people that are like, when I really got to know Ben, he's like just so easy to be myself around. I have full permission to be me. So I love that about you. But I was thinking and praying because I try to leave people with a scripture, but to be honest, I thought of something else. I have told you this. I'm a big hymn guy. Cat's out of the bag. I don't dislike modern contemporary worship. I just love hymns. I always have. But one of the most famous hymns, and you probably know it, is "Come Thou Fount." But I was thinking about you, and I was driving in listening to my contemporary hymn playlist. I could send you the link. But the song came on, and right there in the very beginning, it says this. It says, "Come thou fount of every blessing." Then the second line says this, "Tune my heart to sing thy grace." And I was thinking about that, "tune my heart," because I've heard the song hundreds of times. And I think in this discussion, it's just more evidence that your pursuit of God tuned my heart, that I would sing your praise, even as you talk about like, yeah, we want to pursue excellence, but we're not looking for the best musicians. We're looking for someone whose heart is to be poured out. I think it would be very difficult to quantify the fruit of your worship ministry here, but I think if you just concentrated it all the way back down, it's God tune my heart to lead. Whether it's you up front or empowering a young person to do it, or you sitting in a pew or doing sound, whatever it is, it's a culture of everyone saying, I'm going to lead from my heart. And so I'm extremely grateful, not just to work with you, but to be shaped by God as you lead worship. So I appreciate you. I'll actually tuck this in. This is a couple lines of the lyrics, and I got you a little gift. But as we always end, if you have anything you want to leave us with, any words of encouragement, and then we can sign off from there.
I would say the big thing that I would say first, Libby Rose, you're awesome. I love you. Just because I didn't mention her, I always have to mention all my kids.
People used to think it was a joke. Sorry to cut you off, but I used to just blatantly call Libby my favorite.
Yeah.
And I still do. One of the greatest students I've ever had in youth ministry, she's got a lot of you. It used to drive me crazy of having to spend years to figure out what kids really meant. Not Libby. It was like day one. This is what I feel. Boom. And we became fast friends in that. I used to enjoy how raw and open she was, and I still love so much that we still spend some time together.
Cool. But she's my worshiper, so I would say to people, say yes. Don't be afraid of it. It's going to take work, and there might be some challenges along the way. But I always like to say, and I didn't say this, somebody else did, character is revealed through adversity. And those things that you need to work on as you say yes, and those things that you need to lay down that you need Jesus' help with, you will learn through those things. You will learn through that adversity. And so say yes to the next thing, because I'm now close to 51. I know that's crazy to say. I still feel there's a lot more to come. And I'm so excited by this next generation of people, of worshipers that are coming up, because it's my job to prepare and let them go. You know, it's not about me. It's about glorifying God. So I'm excited about that next generation. And, you know, as what I've shared with, I think I shared with the pastoral team, you know, the 40 years of this church. It's pretty incredible. I've only attended 2 churches in my life.
Wow.
Melody Land in this place, and which is weird to even say nowadays. But all that to say is that do the next thing. Say yes, you know, and God will work through you. Don't be afraid of adversity. There's going to be people that will come around you and that will support you and that will be there for you. Don't be afraid to ask for help. So I think that's what I'd say.
That's awesome. That's such a good message to people who are feeling insecure or unsure of what to do next, just doing the next thing. I love that came out of every part of your story. So we'll sign off here. And if you're still listening on YouTube or recording, the outro song is one that you recorded for us, an original. So Ben, thanks for coming on. Thanks for concluding season 2. And we'll sign off here.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Appreciate you.
This I recall, therefore I hope, Lord's loving kindness never ceases, for His compassions never fail. Great is Thy faithfulness, and right now I make my stand.